Good morning. Welcome to the Mayor's recommended budget presentations for the 2017 budget. John Quincy, Chair of the Budget Committee, and we're going to begin today's meeting on time so we can continue to keep all the other departments moving forward on time. So thank you, Mr. Hecker, for being here, representing Mayor Hodges' office. And I think we can begin if you just take us through your department budget requests.
Mr. Chair, council members, thank you for the opportunity. As you mentioned, my name is Ben Hecker. I'm the Mayor's Deputy Chief of Staff, and it is my privilege to kick off the budget hearings for this year. Our budget should be brief. You can find details about it on page F138 through F142 in your budget books if you're reading along at home. This first slide here gives you an indication of the business lines our budget is arranged around: policy development, policy and program promotion, and policy and program implementation. Much like the City Council, the Mayor's Office is responsible for leading and supporting policy from the beginning stages all the way through the oversight level. We do pre-development work, we do promotion of new policies and existing city policies, and we provide support for departments in implementing and overseeing those policies once they're put in place. We also do a good amount of work leveraging partnerships, both within the city, at the state, at the regional level, all the way up to the federal level as well. To deliver those goals, as you can see here on this slide, this is the way that our department is organized. We have 12 FTEs in addition to the mayor herself. We have 6 policy area focused policy aides. We have 1 administrative staff, 1 staff dedicated to constituent relations. We have a policy director, and we have myself. And our budget this year only requests the current service level inflationary increase. As you can see, we don't have any change items for 2017. The mayor respectfully asks that you adopt the recommendation for our office budget. I am, of course, happy to stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Can you describe the inflationary increases? Is it all in the salary area, or
That's correct.
Okay? Did any other line items, for example, travel or office materials? Those weren't anything that was just in
correct.
Supply.
That's just personnel costs.
Well, thank you for that clarification. Are there any other questions from council members on the mayor's budget presentation? Should not be much, because obviously they're not asking for anything. So thank you very much, Mr. Hecker, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Mr. Chair.
And you so far have the record of being 4 minutes. So you have the shortest department presentation.
Happy to be.
I'm sure that will be eclipsed by Mr. Carl in a matter of moments.
Much appreciated.
We'll try.
We'll allow for a few minutes for the transition between the mayor's office and the city clerk and elections department, and take this opportunity to introduce my colleagues on the dais at this time. We've got Councilmember Gordon, Councilmember Yang, Councilmember Bender, Councilmember Johnson, and Councilmember Warsami. As no quorum is needed to conduct these meetings, we're going to be continuing to flow in and out as the day progresses and as the months progress. So, Mr. Carl, welcome, and you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to members of the subcommittee. As noted, my name is Casey Carl. I have the privilege of serving as city clerk. And it's my pleasure to present the mayor's 2017 budget proposals, both for the city council and for the office of city clerk, which I refer to collectively as the city's legislative department. And as we get started, I'll note that that legislative department, which is composed of the city council, the office of city clerk, represents approximately less than 1% of the mayor's total proposed budget, nearly $9.9 million for the total, which derives from the city's general fund. The remainder largely comes from internal services that are associated with the operation of our Document Solutions Center, a unit that's part of our Records and Information Management Division. The department is composed or proposed to be funded in a total amount of approximately $11.3 million. That's roughly on par with the approved funding plan for the current fiscal year in 2016. The mayor has graciously proposed some change items to the clerk's budget, which I will address in a moment. I'd like to begin in reverse order by reviewing the proposed budget for City Council. It's found on pages F19 to F23 in the budget book, also online. And following that, I'll review the proposed budget for the Office of City Clerk, which is then found on pages F14 to F18. This slide shows that the core programs associated with the City Council include governance and policy enactment, its legislative responsibilities, executive oversight and evaluation, oversight of the administration and operations and delivery of city services, and community representation. The City Council is composed of 13 members, each of whom represents a ward of approximately 31,000 members based on the 2015 population estimates that were published by the United States Census Bureau. That means that each council member is elected to represent a ward roughly equivalent to the entire population of the city of Brooklyn Center. For these constituents, a council member is an elected policymaker, an advocate, and an ombudsman. Individually and collectively, council members represent the needs, priorities, and interests of their constituents and their wards, both as a voting member of the city's governing body, as well as through service with various organizations, boards, commissions, and other groups at local, regional, state, and national levels. And of course, the most fundamental and perhaps most visible aspect of the City Council is its work as the governing body of the city. In that capacity, the council works in partnership with the mayor to enact, amend, and repeal local laws and public policies aimed at ensuring the health, safety, and welfare of the community. From a budgetary perspective, the City Council represents just under $5 million with a full-time staffing complement of 39 positions. That includes the 13 elected policymakers and their aides. The mayor has recommended no changes in this program between the current fiscal year and 2017, so the fiscal impact for the City Council department is largely flat as proposed. And that completes my review of the mayor's budget for the City Council program. I'm happy to respond to questions about that program or to continue with a review of the Office of City Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Looks like we have at least one question from Councilmember Yang.
Mr. Carl, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Carl, just a quick question with regards to this budgetary item. Are the council budgets included in the amount as well?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, yes, the ward operating budgets are included within the budget allocation proposed within the program I just described. Again, all remaining largely flat from the current fiscal year 2016 going into 2017.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, so you feel free to continue. Which one are you starting on, Mr. Carl?
Next, I will turn to a review of the proposed budget for Office of City Clerk. That budget can be found on pages F14 through F18 in your budget book.
Thank you.
This slide shows that the City Clerk's office, the City Clerk primarily serves in three primary capacities, which reflect its business lines. First, as Chief Elections Official, the office enables a democratic representative system of government to be achieved at federal, state, and local levels. We do this by planning and administering all aspects of federal, state, and local elections, and by ensuring that voters have free, fair, and equal access to the ballot box. Second, as the facilitator of legislative operations, this office ensures that government policies, decisions, and the processes that support them are accessible to the public. We do this by preparing, presenting, publishing, and permanently preserving the city charter, its codes, policies, rules, and regulations, all of which set forth the rights and responsibilities of those who live, work, and play in the city of Minneapolis. Third, as the official custodian of the city's records, data, and information assets, this office empowers the people to hold its government accountable. We do this by ensuring proper controls and legal compliance across the enterprise with respect to the creation, use, exchange, storage, and disposition of government data within the requirements of law, and by identifying and permanently preserving records that have enduring legal, administrative, and historical value. These three programs and the outcomes that they achieve reflect the hallmarks of good government, making the Office of City Clerk not only an important component of the city enterprise, but an essential unit that provides critical services that support everyone inside and outside of its walls. This slide provides a high-level analysis of the proposed budget for 2017 by program as compared to the current fiscal year. You'll note there is one change item in the next year's budget proposed by the mayor. It's tied to our Records and Information Management Division. The other programs remain relatively flat between the two fiscal years, with minor increases for routine inflation and anticipated operating expenditures. This slide shows a detail of the mayor's proposed 2017 budget by program. So specifically, it divides the operations of the city clerk into two major groups. First, elections and voter services, and then all of our other programs lumped together as Office of City Clerk. This includes funding for the Records and Information Management Division and the Document Solutions Center, as well as the funds that support our legislative operations and department management. I mentioned that Mayor Hodges had recommended an increase in ongoing spending tied to the Records and Information Management Division, and it is for one full-time records specialist position. The request for this position is tied directly to the results of the 2015 records management audit, and it's intended to provide the resources required to realign our existing program to more closely match an internal service delivery model that can support centralized services across the enterprise. I presented the department's management response to that audit in front of the Committee of the Whole at its March 30th meeting and mentioned at that time the need for this additional full-time resource. The audit found that Minneapolis lacked an effective enterprise framework to govern its information assets, and that this resulted in an inability to validate compliance with applicable laws and policies. State law mandates that all city governments implement and maintain a records management program, and the city clerk is the municipal officer charged with managing that program and ensuring compliance. Using an evaluatory model developed by ARMA International, the audit scored Minneapolis at 1.65 on a 5-point scale, where a rating of 3 is considered minimal in terms of acceptance for demonstrating a compliant information management system. That score means that the existing enterprise framework in Minneapolis fails to meet minimum standards for legal, regulatory, and operational requirements. The city scored lowest on rating criteria tied to systems that demonstrate integrity, data protection, and legal compliance. The addition of this full-time resource will allow the clerk's office to reorganize its operations to match what other internal service departments use, specifically assigning a subject matter liaison to each department, who then can become a partner with those assigned departments and provide them the necessary expertise, consultation and advice, and hands-on support to achieve compliance that we seek to move the city's rating on the ARMA International criteria to an acceptable threshold. In addition, this resource would allow the clerk's office to assume a stronger and more proactive role in providing such centralized services, such as the intake and fulfillment of data practice requests, review and redaction of non-public data, and destruction of data when authorized by law. Next, I'll present recommended funding from the city's operating capital program, what is referred to as CARS.
Mr. Carl, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did have a question. And it was before you started actually talking about the record specialist position, which I am very supportive of, having sit on the audit committee. I know it's an important step, and I'm glad we were able to get through 2016 and look forward to a 2017 conclusion. I'm looking back at the finance summary of the Office of City Clerk, and I notice a shift between general fund and non-general fund. Do you have an explanation for why the non-general fund went down a little bit from last time?
Mr. Chair, the non-general fund that's reflected in the clerk's budget is tied to the operations of the Document Solutions Center, which must raise its money internally based on service to other departments. And so it varies by year based on projections, and the finance department works very closely with us in developing those anticipated projections and then watching carefully throughout the year as we get those revenues in.
Thank you. It was a pretty small amount, but I was just curious if some of those had been shifted to general fund items. So that's fine. And were there any other questions on the other portion? Not seeing any. Please continue. Back to CARS.
Certainly, absolutely. So under the CARS, or operating capital recommendations, Mayor Hodges has recommended funding totaling $180,000 plus some dollars for the existing project to acquire and deploy an enterprise-wide legislative information management system, which we refer to as LIMS. The clerk's office has deployed an interim solution, but we also have been contracting for a permanent solution with a company called DataNet. That project is scheduled to bring online the permanent solution in the first quarter of 2017. This additional funding will fill the gap in the initial project account to ensure that we're able to bring all aspects of that application online. That includes not only technical support for the legislative operations of City Council and its standing committees, but also modules to support the independent executive and audit committees, the Charter Commission, other appointed boards and commissions that operate within the enterprise, and also to support our opens appointments process and automated processes for the centralized production of public notices and calendars. So of all these, the data will be made accessible 24/7, 365 through a web-based portal. That concludes my review of the mayor's proposed budget for the city clerk department. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. I, like all of us, I'm sure, are looking forward to the legislative management system. Congratulations to the staff who has gotten us through this point. I know we've had some fits and starts with the providers over the last several years. Certainly a very important aspect. Councilmember Yang has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Carl, when I'm looking at elections and voter services, I see a decrease of about $360,000, and just wondering, in this election year and the next that's coming, what's the impact, in that situation?
Mr. Chair, as you know, this is a very interesting subject for us because elections are a volatile issue, not just here in Minneapolis, but in all communities that administer elections. Each election has its own character, if you will, based on the issues that are at play within the community, the campaigns and candidates that are happening. So from a budgetary perspective, looking forward or prospectively, the Finance Department works with us to provide a stable rate of what we can count on for every year's elections that we administer. We also work with them throughout the year for any unanticipated costs that then they work within funding resources to help us to pay for the needs of administering that specific election. And you'll also recall that after every election, we do a debrief with the Elections Committee, which says, among other things, lessons learned, but also the total costs for that election and a justification of why those costs were incurred beyond that which is appropriated within the mayor's budget approved by council.
And Mr. Carl, typically, what's budgeted, let's say in a given year, let's say any random given year, is that usually what is spent by elections and voter services, or in a situation where, let's say in a given year, we have costs that just run over. What happens in those situations? I think you kind of alluded to it, but if you can explain that, that'd be great.
Certainly. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, the elections budget has to be seen as two buckets, or at least this is how I approach it. There's what I call our operating budget, which are the permanent full-time staff and our internal operating resources. That's a set cost that carries year to year. In addition, we have our election cost for that year. So in a 4-year cycle, we have a presidential, we have a gubernatorial, we have a municipal, and we should have, hopefully, knock on wood, an off year. And so in each of those 3 years during the 4-year cycle, we have to work with the finance department to anticipate what the financing needs will be for that specific type of election based on projected voter turnout and participation, how many precincts we have. As you know, we added 7 new precincts this year. That has an unanticipated costs associated with it because that wasn't something that was built into the budget. So again, we have our operating bucket that pays for the day-to-day costs of an elections unit. And then we have the election-specific costs, and we work with finance very closely to track and monitor any deviation from what's appropriated to the elections office each year. And then we do a reconciliation at the end of the year in terms of any overture from that. And I am happy to let Ms. Green speak in more detail if she has things, but I think at a high level that summarizes how the elections budget is funded and how we manage those expenses.
Yep. Councilmember Yang, does that satisfy what you're looking for? Thank you very much. Any additional questions for Mr. Carl? Not seeing any. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And good luck to the Budget Committee.
Thank you very much. That concludes all of the city clerk, elections, and city council
yes.
Portion of it. Obviously, you're over the 4 minutes for record by Mr. Hecker, but the city council portion was less than 4 minutes. I just wanted you to know.
Thank you. My competitive spirit. Thank you.
All right. Do we have is the health department going to be ready to present theirs, or are we going to wait for the commissioner? We're running a little ahead of schedule, so we'll allow for a little transition time. So we'll take a 5-minute pause if we can on this portion of it. We'll begin with the health department at the conclusion of that. I do want to point out we've, of course, been joined by Councilmember Palmisano, and I just wanted to point out Ms. Green, who's going to be is our budget director, and is going to be in and out and crazy for the next several months. So thanks very much, Latonia, for being here and helping us guide through this. So we'll see you again in 3 minutes.
Good morning.
We are back. We're ready to take up the Health Department budget presentation for the 2017 Mayor's Recommended Budget. Just as a reminder, I'm John Quincy, the chair of the Budget Committee, joined by Council Members Bender, Yang, and Gordon. And as I mentioned earlier today, we're going to be certainly coming in and out. Other council members have been here and will be back presently. Also sharing information about Latonia Green, who's our budget director, and of course Kelly Geester, who remains our city clerk on this. Ms. Commissioner Musicant, if you're ready to present the Health Department, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You have received, as an attachment to the your business, your agenda, a thicker packet that includes everything about our department's budget and some slides that show you the results of some of the work that has been funded both by the general fund and other sources of funding. Due to the time that I've been allotted today, I'm going to focus only on the mayor's recommendations, and so there's a smaller set of slides that, do we have paper copies for them too? There are paper copies if you want to follow along on the smaller one. Okay, so let's proceed. I'm going to go right past the organizational chart. And what I'm going to do in the next few slides is this lays out the various program areas of the department that, as I said, are much more robustly described in the larger pack of slides. But I will at least tell you what the department is up to. We have a family and early childhood, quite a robust program in that area. When we created these slides, the mayor has recommended some additional funding or some funding for East Africans with Disabilities. I thought it would go here. It will probably end up going in our public health infrastructure section in the final budget, but I will describe it placed here. We also have program areas of school-based clinics and youth development. There's several mayor's recommendations in the area of youth development. Youth violence prevention is another robust area of our department's work, and you'll see quite a number of mayor's recommendations in that area. Healthy living is almost entirely grant funded. You'll see one small recommendation from the mayor for some general fund one-time expenditures in that area. Lead hazard and control, there is a recommendation for an additional FTE and some one-time funding. In food, lodging, and pools, there's been quite a growth in the restaurant business, hospitality industry, and so Mayor's recommending 2 additional FTEs there. And in environmental services, there have been some changes in the fees that we charge to polluters, and so the Mayor's recommending a couple of recommendations there. In the area of seniors, there is no mayor's recommendation, but I just wanted to pause for a second and say that some of you may be aware of the Skyway Senior Center that the city operates really with total sponsorship of another entity. And until recently, UCare was that sponsor. They've had a change in their business and so are no longer able to be the sponsor. We have aggressively explored other sponsorship options and continue to do so. We are also looking at the idea of a soft landing for participants, so some other entity that wanted to provide services to seniors in the downtown area. There is an organization called Friends of the Skyway Senior Center that has been raising funds over time, and we are using those funds to bridge this period of time for us. We expect that we can continue to operate with that kind of support into early 2017. But there may be a need for some one-time bridge funding to help us either find a soft landing or find a new sponsor.
Excuse me, Commissioner. Yes. Councilmember Johnson has a question.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I was just curious, do you know in this budget if we're including our block grant nurse programs, any funding like we did last year? You know, we had both included in the budget for Nokomis Healthy Seniors, but then we also had an amendment that the council approved for Longfellow Healthy Seniors and for, I believe, Seward or Southwest Healthy Seniors.
There's no mayor's recommendation about that.
So that was one-time money, and that will not continue, basically, in this budget. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
You're right.
So another area of work in the department is emergency preparedness and infectious disease. And then the final area is the core public health infrastructure, where I did mention we'll probably put that Somalis with Disabilities program. So I'm going to start with a slide on a reduction to our general fund spending, which the mayor included in her budget recommendations, that there be a 1% reduction in every department in their general fund support. For us, that comes up to $65,000. We have recently received news that we have a new 5-year grant from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention called Preventing Teen Dating and Youth Violence, Addressing Shared Risk and Protective Factors. That grant will support 50% of a project coordinator who is currently general fund supported and 20% of an administrative support person who is currently general fund supported. So that we can, with confidence, say that for the next 5 years, we can make this cut of $65,000 in the general fund. This does, however, put us in a tighter financial situation because we are quite grant dependent, and we like to operate in a way that allows us not to have to hire and fire people for short periods of time between grants. Grants received are in large part leveraged by the general fund support that across many parts of our business. And in fact, for 2017, 51% of the department's budget is non-general fund support. Of that, in 2016, a fairly large share of it was competitive grants, $6.3 million in competitive grants so far in 2016, which is a 7% increase from 2015. So let's begin with the mayor's recommendation for new funding for the department, starting with the East Africans with Disabilities. The mayor is recommending $30,000 in one-time funding. Many recent refugees and immigrants have disabilities that lead to civic and community isolation and carry significant impacts on their quality of life. And so some of the identified community needs related to this are in the areas of English proficiency, basic math skills, access to government assistance and employment placement, and access to specialized medical care. So the outcomes of this one-time funding is that we will contract with a community agency focusing on empowerment and leadership by East Africans with disabilities to address isolation and access to services. Now into our program area of youth development. The first recommendation is $100,000 in ongoing funding related to young men's sexual health and associated outreach. Chlamydia infection rate amongst teens, 15 to 19 in Minneapolis, is more than double the statewide rate, and the rate of gonorrhea infections in Minneapolis is 4 times higher than the statewide rate. Youth of color disproportionately represent the majority of the cases identified. In 2015, we conducted a youth-led community needs assessment partnership with Youth Prize and reported these results to our City Council committee, HECE. The youth interviewed youth of color about healthy sexuality. Major themes that emerged were the need for greater access to free or low-cost condoms, the need for testing and treatment, especially in schools, on the streets, and at community-based sites. So this funding is in line with those recommendations, and the goals provide testing to 800 young men and provide 1,500 additional one-on-one and group educational opportunities. You'll see in this slide that the proportion of our youth who are African American or Black is about 20%, but the proportion of those youth, or the proportion of youth who have chlamydia or gonorrhea who are Black or African American is much higher.
Commissioner, a question from Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. I certainly think these are important items here. I remember when growing up as a teenager, these school clinics offering free condoms to students, and I remember a number of clinics available around the city that already provided free STD testing. So I'm wondering how has that situation changed? Is this to go above and beyond what's already happening? And can you kind of paint that whole picture for us?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson. Yes, our school-based clinics still make available all kinds of contraception, including condoms. And there are community clinics, but young men are often not highly affiliated with healthcare. And I think that maybe we could generalize that for men in general, but certainly young men. And so that has been one of the kind of program areas. We did a federal research grant a number of years ago that found that we really need different strategies to reach young men who are disconnected. And that is where the concentration of some of these infections needs to be addressed.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. The next recommendation from the...
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention, I recall when the young men who were part of the program came to present on this last item, and it was actually a very powerful presentation, one of the most significant I've seen in my time on the council. So it's a small program within the health department that has a specific goal around sexual health and disease prevention, but I thought the reach of the program went much farther, and especially in the way that I saw leadership development opportunity in the young men of color that presented. I just wanted to note that, and I think for folks who aren't on the HESA committee, again, I think it was one of the most impactful presentations that the committee had ever seen, and one of the most impactful things the council had, just the voices of the youth sharing their experience.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, thank you. That's our recollection as well. We think that when we engage young people, help them identify what's going on in their community and listen to their recommendations, that we are quite well served.
Thank you.
The next recommendation is a continuation of something that was funded last year, a 4-H partnership for Somali youth. The recommendation is $50,000 in one-time funding to continue that program, which focuses on STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math component of after-school work. The program that we initiated last year because of the funding from the city didn't get started quite as fast as we wanted because of some contract issues. The expectation is that this year's recommendation will result in 40 youth who are served annually. In 2016, we have served 30 so far, with additional youth on the waiting list. So it is definitely a wanted and desirable program in the community. Another recommendation from the mayor in the youth development area is the establishment of Children's Savings Account program, and the recommendation is one-time funding of $15,000 that would flow through the health department to the youth coordinating board to develop such a program. So this funding is for the development, not for the funding of the savings accounts per se. Children's savings accounts are something that's occurring in other communities. It promotes savings and asset building opportunities for children, especially with those from low and moderate income families. Most of the programs focus on helping children access post-secondary education by building both their savings and educational aspirations. So the YCB is already pursuing additional foundation support and additional organizational engagement to create this program. This $15,000 will help us get started.
Thanks, Commissioner. We have a question from Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize, Ms. Musican, for being late. Can I go back to this young man sexual health outreach? I remember a program that the health department was engaged in a few years ago with Fremont Clinic, I think was a provider on the north side. What were the results of that program? Good, bad, indifferent?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, yes, that was a program that was initially funded by a 5-year federal research grant, and we did show that while other parts of the state had growing rates of chlamydia, we were able to flatten our rates during that same period of time, and so and reach many young people. They did kind of secret shoppers in the clinics to see how accessible the clinics felt to young men. They did all kinds of awareness raising, doing at the time CDs, rap CDs, and community outreach. We have tried to keep that alive as a program because it was quite valuable reaching young men who were not being reached in other ways, but have had diminished funds to keep it alive, and so it's become a smaller and smaller and smaller program, which really is not having the impact of the original program. This will allow us to build back up on some of the learnings we had from that grant, and also to modify it based on the input that we've had from the young people that did research in the community.
Just a curiosity then, if there's some way to look at when we were having these flattened rates, how they compare now with these new numbers as far as infections, I'd be interested.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, so you're looking for like a graphic that would show us, what happened to those rates and what's happened since?
Right. That'd be helpful. And then I guess I would ask now, when you were talking about the children's savings account, you're talking about approaching I imagine, financial institutions then for help in actually getting to the point where we would have funding for kids' savings accounts.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, Anne DeGroot has actually been working quite a bit on this already, so she probably would be the best to answer. But yes, I think there are both foundations that might be interested in the infrastructure of creating a program, but also financial institutions that might be interested in sponsoring it and holding the accounts.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Moving on to the recommendations that are in the area of youth violence prevention. The first is $45,000 of ongoing funding to implement something that we have piloted for the last couple of years called the Blueprint Approved Institute. This came out of an experience we had that many of the organizations that are on the ground working with the youth that we want to reach are small. They're led by charismatic, program-oriented folks who really don't have the time or wherewithal to create organizations that can compete for dollars. And so even as we wanted to give grants to them, we found that many of these organizations just couldn't write the kind of proposals that an organization like a city looks for. And so we started this Blueprint Approved Institute where we go through things like logic models and budgeting and evaluating what you're doing and thinking about what you're doing in terms of best practices. And we believe that it's something that is essential for us to continue in order to reach the young people that we want to reach in our community. But it's also a model that might be of interest to the rest of the enterprise in terms of really looking at equity and trying to be in relationship and build the capacity of community-based organizations that we'd like to work with, but also maintaining our own standards. The second recommendation is $40,000 in one-time funding for community outreach and engagement related to youth violence prevention, especially focusing on the 18 to 24-year-old group, where schools maybe are not in session or where young people are no longer in school. And so the types of activities that would be funded would be an annual conference that we have begun to hold. We've had it, I think, twice now, so this would be a third time. Bridges to Manhood Conference, really focusing on young men and incorporating rites of passage into that conference has become quite a powerful experience. Partnerships with local agencies to create activities around Youth Violence Prevention Week. You might want to look at, there's a link in your slide to a short video that was created by someone in the community around activities that occurred last time this year during Youth Violence Prevention Week and the power of changing the narrative. Partnerships with local agencies to provide programming during the summer of 2017, including late night basketball, and then continuation of our pop-up parks, which bring positive activities to areas that are either identified by the police as having maybe gathering people for not the best purposes or where there are parks without programming in them, brings a different sense of place to communities. The next two slides have to do with group violence intervention, and so I'm going to spend a little more.
Excuse me, Commissioner. Before you start the next slides, I did note Councilmember Yang had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, with regards to the youth violence prevention, I see all this stuff. It sounds really great, but at least in Ward 5 and Ward 4 as well, I mean, there has been a spate of gang violence happening up there, and I don't see anything related to gang violence, here, anything related to curbing gang violence here. And I'm just wondering, with regards to $40,000, but I mean, I would imagine like we would need more money to curb or stop the gang violence that's happening up on the north side. And just wondering if, with regards to this program right here, whether there is any, I guess, sort of thrust to stop that stuff from happening, because I mean I think a lot of the stuff that is happening, it's not necessarily folks who are, let's say, adults who are engaged in this sort of thing. I mean it's actually pretty young people who are engaged in this, and so I'm wondering, I mean, can you help me out to try to understand this? Because certainly I can tell you that, from the discussions related to gang violence, it almost seems like it's exclusively within the police department. But I mean, I see funding that goes to the health departments for that youth violence. And, I know that there have been stories, in the Strib in which, let's say, the health department has been quoted as saying, we don't have a strategy for curbing gang violence. And so I'm just wondering, I mean, how can we get to a point where, there's that sort of working together between the health department and the police departments to just stop gang violence in general?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang, the reason I'm smiling is because the next two slides are exactly about that. But our youth violence prevention blueprint really looks at the whole spectrum that we need to be addressing, and so these first two slides are more in the prevention. But let's go on to the next two slides that are specifically about connecting the health department's work to the police and are focused on gangs and cliques.
Before you do that,
Yes.
I just want to check in with the Council President. Did you need something before we go to those next two slides, Council President?
I would just agree with my colleague, Councilmember Yang. We have huge challenges in our community with violence, and as I look at 100,000 here and 50,000 here and 40,000 here for a new program, what we're doing is not working. And so everybody's been patting themselves on the back saying we've made great strides in youth violence prevention, and I have to disagree. So I think one of the things we have to do is look at what we're doing. This is new stuff. What are we doing along the lines of what's already embedded in the budget? This is additional. And I think it's time for us to have a presentation about exactly what we are doing, what works, and decide then where we put our dollars. Because, again, I see all new programs, a whole bunch of new programs, and I know things are already embedded in the budget. And that, to me, is we need some kind of look at outcomes for what we're doing. This sexual health is just another one of those things. We're doing this. We've diminished the funding, as you said, for that. So now we're going to up another $100,000. Well, I want to know, when we did this check yourself or whatever it was called, did it work? And that's what it was called. I think I'm right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did it work? It didn't work if we're up to 4 times the rate of the rest of the state. I mean, we're taking 10,000 here and 50,000 here and 40,000 here without any realistic look at if we're making progress. I find it very frustrating. The other thing I want to say is that it is a challenge for, I guess I would say, I probably have 2 or 3 calls a month of people saying, I have a nonprofit and I want to work with youth. I have people calling me, telling me they want us to buy a house or to give us one of the vacant houses so that they can, work with youth. There are lots of good, well-intentioned people out there, but I want us to be really careful when we do this kind of choosing about who actually gets dollars or is capable of applying for a grant and managing a grant, that we are careful about who we do fund. Because as I say, there are hundreds of people that call in the course of a year. I've got a youth program. I love kids. I can't stand watching what's going on, in my neighborhoods. But, we need assurances if we're going to fund them, that the protocols need to be in place for people working with young people, background checks, all that stuff, financial accounting. I don't want to be embarrassed again. And I want us to be really careful about that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, I hear your comments. The Blueprint Approved Institute is actually focused on building that capacity. It's mostly education of these agencies, and then they're on their own, and hopefully they can compete. But we thought that we needed to help try and bridge that distance, and still, so that we could hold them accountable if they are funded with us. As it was, they were never getting a chance to even have grants with us because they didn't have the capacity. Now, they may or may not be able to compete for grants in the future, but they'll be further educated. 2 of the 7 that we worked with the first year were able to go and compete for some other grants, non-city grants. And so it builds community capacity that way as well. Some of this, the first 2 slides that I reviewed with you are programs that were funded by the funding we got from the federal government through the National Forum on Youth Violence Prevention, which is an Obama administration initiative. And so we don't expect that is likely to continue. And so that's why we're looking for one-time funding to keep it going in 17 and see what the new federal administration directions are.
Commissioner, Councilmember Andrew Johnson. I always get the Johnsons confused. So
thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I also share the sentiments of my colleagues on this as well. I think that every council member wants to tackle youth violence and wants to find the best way to do it. And I think it's just a question of are these the most effective strategies or not? I just looked at page 26 on the longer presentation we have here, and it looks like we're at a 5-year high of youth violence. And we have increasing upticks in that. And I understand it's a complex issue. There's many factors involved here, from economic security of parents and their ability to ultimately be home and present and help with the kids, to education, to disparities in the community. And there are a lot of different factors on it. But I think that what I get concerned about is, and not to beat up on group violence intervention here, but I'll just point out where the concern comes in. This very well could be effective, but just reading here about how one of the activities of this is to communicate the consequences for continued engagement in future violence. And I know it's said that criminals are dumb, but I can't believe they're that